I started knowing more of the importance of September 11th between my older sisters and just going to school. We would talk about it and the horrible terrorist attack that happened that day. As you rewatch it, it still impacts you the same today as it did that day, if not more, now that I fully understand what it was.
Oh my God, we are...
Janelle McMillan was the last survivor found alive under the rubble 27 hours after 9/11. She was at work in the North Tower when they heard a crash, and so they didn't know what was going on, so they barricaded themselves in the office.
Being the person that I was, and I realized when I find out that a plane, it could be a possible terrorist attack, that's when my life just flashed right before me, and I think about the life that I was living before.
Finally, at the 13th, she had to stop to take off her heels. At that moment, the tower completely collapsed and she was buried alive. Janelle fully didn't understand what was happening. She never got to take a step after she took off her shoes, and her head was pinned between two concrete pillars. Her legs were trapped under the stairs. Her left hand was the only hand she had free because her right was pinned under her legs. So she just waved her left hand in the air. She could feel fire below her feet, and she was standing on, later they would find out would be a dead firefighter.
The time spent under the rubble, it really had bring me closer to God. I prayed and I prayed. I see my life before. I see my daughter, she was 12 years at the time. I saw my family faces. I wanted to live, and being under there, I just begged and asked God for a second chance.
She had a watch that still to this day she wears that would work, and she could hear the seconds just tick and tick and tick. And she could hear people below her in a little tunnel, but she was stuck. After 27 hours, her left hand was free, and a service dog did smell her out, and she finally was rescued.
My hand stood out there, and someone grabbed my hand and held onto my hand and said, call me by my name, said, Janelle, I got you. My name is Paul. And I held onto his hand so tight, and I just said to myself, I said, thank God. And I felt that total calmness and relief in my body, and I kept holding on to Paul's hand. After a couple minutes, I could hear the rescuer coming by, removing the debris and stuff and cutting away stuff, until finally someone grabbed me the back of my shoulder where my head was, and then Paul let go of my hand, and my head yanked out backwards, and I tried to open my eyes to see him, and it was just like a shadow, and I was just saying to myself, thank God, thank God.
And so this person, Paul, was what she considers today to be her angel. She never did find out who this Paul was, or if he even was a real person. Janelle, when she woke up 5 weeks later and she was asking for Paul, and they said he wasn't a real person, the doctors did tell her she would never walk again, but yet today she not only walks, but she does run. Janelle's story to me is the complete representation of how even when you are completely surrounded by concrete and stuck and can't move and can't talk, that you don't give up and that you do keep holding on and thinking about your family, her boyfriend at the time, and you persevere through it.
When 9/11 happened, I was in my teens. I remember clearly where I was at and when it happened in the morning. I was in my English class at high school, and right away just started hearing whispers going around me of what had happened. And then my teacher decided to put it on the TV in the classroom, and first thing I thought was, is this a movie? Officer David Lim and his partner, Cirrus, were going through their usual tasks in the morning. They just basically started their morning having breakfast together at their office on the lower level floor of the South Tower. And as they were having their breakfast, they got a call right away saying that the North Tower was hit, or there was an explosion in the North Tower.
I hear on the radio from the police desk that an explosion had occurred on the upper levels of One World Trade. So I said to Cirrus, listen, there's going to be problems. You better stay right here, because he's a bomb dog, he's not a search and rescue dog. And I left him in his kennel, right, and proceeded over to One World Trade Center to assist with the rescue operations.
In fact, he actually made it all the way to the 44th floor of the North Building. And as he was rescuing innocent people that were injured or just scared, he and also 6 other firefighters were escorting an elderly lady down the flight of stairs. However, they only made it to the 4th floor, and then the North Tower collapsed on them. Officer David Lim, thought that he was gonna die, but never gave up and continued fighting. Him and his team that were underneath all of this rubble, and they made it out after 5 hours.
The scene here is just one right out of one of the movies you would see in Hollywood. People walking around with cell phones and tears, holding their heads, looking up at what's left of the World Trade Center and just shaking their heads in disbelief.
While Officer Lim was on the 44th floor escorting innocent people down the stairway, that's exactly when the South Tower was hit. And that's exactly where his partner Cirrus was at in the office during that time. And I could only imagine that Officer Lim had to know that his own partner that he was supposed to protect and save during anything was now trapped in there all alone. Officer Lim found out that his own partner did not make it when they found the remains of his partner, Cirrus.
This is Cirrus's badge, which is attached to a key fob. Right? It says K917, and it is actually the Port Authority shield with the 2 circles for New York and New Jersey right on the front, just like the regular police shields that you see on our police officers. He wore this around his neck, on his chain, right? And this way it would identify him as a police officer to those that would see him. Although the fact that he was attached to me all the time more or less said that, you know. As much as I love that leash and the chain and the badge, I want everybody else that comes to the memorial to know what Cirrus was like, you know, for me. You know, people don't realize that when these dogs they do come home with us, you know, they're part of the family. And, you know, when he wore this leash, you know, it was just like every other dog in the neighborhood, you know, and he was friendly to the other dogs and so forth. So for when I hold this leash, you know, that's what it brings back is happier memories, you know, of what Sirius was like.
After 9/11, we here at BK Lighting decided to never forget what had happened, those who had survived, those who had fallen, as well as those who have served in our military.
Let's go!
So after meeting Justin Bond with Our Hero's Dreams, we learned of him receiving a service dog. So our attention fell on service dog for veterans. And we came across Doc's Dogs for Vets, and they were in our backyard in Raymond, California.
When I first heard Ben talking about wanting to go into the military, I was very surprised because Ben was fairly shy, kind of a homebody, and I was surprised that he was willing to leave and go to basic training and you know, take on that adventure.
So Ben joined the National Guard. He didn't know what he was going to do when, you know, he had a good head on him, but he, at that point in time, didn't want to know what to do. And so he says, I want to join. So we said, nah, don't sign anything. You come talk to us before you do anything. And then the next thing we know, he has signed up, you know, for 6 years.
For his 16th birthday, he told me that he wanted a dog. And so we said, okay, we'll start out at the shelters and see if there's any dogs that you seem to like. And the first shelter we went to, he saw the 2 girls that became his dogs. And, you know, I wasn't trying to push that on him. If he wanted a, you know, a pure breed, I was happy to get him a pure breed, but he absolutely fell in love with these 2 shelter dogs.
Yeah, so in 2012, he was attached to the 1072nd unit out of Fresno. I remember coming down when he left, and we, you know, we made an effort to come because we, you know, you never know what's going to happen. And so he went to Afghanistan, and he was in one of the bases out there. He was their medic.
Because he was a medic that was part of a military police unit, but they were attached to a transportation company. And to be real honest, I guess I wasn't that worried. I felt like as part of a military unit and a medic, he would be protected, and you don't want to think that something bad's going to happen, and that's not a place I wanted to go. And so I didn't really worry about him too much.
ARPGs from that alleyway!
It's like every horrible film you've ever seen. You know, I've seen films from World War II where the 2 military personnel drive up to the door and tell the mom that that she has lost her son. And at the time, Salvador was working a job in Arizona, and about 9:30, 9:45, I get this knock on the door, and honestly, it was so late, I wasn't planning to open the door, but I saw the military uniforms, and I thought, oh, a couple of Ben's friends have stopped by, and I'll just chat with them for a minute. And of course, as soon as I opened the door, saw the Bible in the hand of the chaplain, which, you know, just your heart just drops. You know that this is not good. So that was obviously the hardest day of my life.
After learning more about Benjamin, we decided that we wanted to get behind him and his family's quest to fulfill his dream. And it was with great pleasure and great honor to be able to reach out and to provide donations and support to Dogs for Veterans and Benjamin and the Playtez family.
Getting this nonprofit started really was a process. When we learned about Ben, one of the things that was really important to me was to connect with his friends, because his friends carry such an important part of his memory. And I didn't know that until we lost Ben. I didn't realize how important it was to know that people were carrying his memory, and they had different memories of him than what we had. So we invited his friends from the 184 in Modesto and just other school friends to meet with us, and so we could explain what had happened. And we thought there would be a dozen or so fellas that would come. And we met at a restaurant, brewery there in Turlock, and we ended up with about 50 people. And they began to share their memories of Ben and talk about Ben, and this idea of the dogs was part of that conversation. The vision is to have a kennel here on this location of kennel where we can bring dogs from shelters, where we can have a training facility for the advanced training, to have possibly a couple of cabins or housing for the veterans to stay in while they come and do their training with the dog. It usually takes 2 to 3 weeks to train the veteran how to work with the dogs. As we started working with people who are in the business of training service dogs, and hearing their stories of how the dogs are able to help the veterans relax, oftentimes bring them out of a PTSD episode. Over time, most of them are able to come off a lot of their medications. And then for veterans who have had trouble leaving their homes and going out in public, the dog then helps them to be able to integrate back into society in the public, and go back to having a job or at least living a fairly normal life.
That's the time between the dogs and Ben. Ben wanted to do something with dogs. This is our version of what he wanted to do. Ben was so thoughtful and so sweet, and sometimes I think he worried about us a little bit with working so hard. But overall, he was a very compassionate person, a very caring person, and I know that he would be so pleased to know that his dream is being fulfilled in a slightly different way to help the people that he loved, because he really did love his brothers and sisters in arms.